So this is our presentation on comparative anatomy, and it is by Alyssa, Valerie, Paula, and Victoria. So the first animal that we are doing is the common name Rich's rat, which is under the species Ratus. So its species kingdom is Animalia. Its phylum is Chordata. Class is Mammalia. Order is Rodentia. Family is Myrdia. Genus is Myriad, and its species is Rattus. So some background for the Rattus is that a rat's size depends on its species and its adaptations that it maintains from its environment and different pressures. The average range for these animals is 5 inches and the weight is about 18 ounces. But with certain adaptations that these animals have had through evolution, this number has gone up significantly. So there are cases where rat species have been found to be as long as 3 feet and about 2 pounds, especially on the East Coast in really big cities like New York. They are found in every single place except in the Arctic, and they are found in woods, forests, fields, meadows, and in human habitats such as cities. Another thing is that they are communal animals, which means that they live in packs and they depend on each other in order to thrive. So if a rat is by itself, it's more likely to die because they are communal animals and communal creatures. Some overview for its anatomy is that its main anatomical regions are its cranial, cervical, pectoral, thoracic, abdomen, and pelvic. They have a closed circulatory system, which means that the blood is reoxygenated through their lungs and their pulmonary artery and is reintroduced back into the heart. They are endothermic, which means that they maintain their own body heat and don't need an external source in order for them to maintain their body temperature at a certain level and symmetry.
The main parts that make the digestive system in rats run smoothly include the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, liver, the small, and the large intestine. As we made the incision on the rat, these were one of the first things that we saw. A pair of kidneys, ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra make up the excretory system. As for the reproductive system, both males and females differ. In the male reproductive system, testes, the epididymis, the penis, and 5 accessory glands are included. As for the females, though, there are 2 ovaries and the female genital tract. The genital tract includes the oviducts, the uterus, the cervix, and the vagina.
Respiratory system in rats, they're obligate nasal breathers, which means they can only breathe through their nasal cavity. They are the only organisms within the Myrdae, which is the rodent family, that have cartilage envelopes that are in the extrapulmonary airways, which is found on like where their esophagus would be. And they have Clara cells in their bronchial epithelium, which helps with mucus movement since they are nose breathers by force.
Rats have a almost identical circulatory system structure as humans do. They have a closed circulatory system, which can be divided into 2 parts, which include the pulmonary and systemic circulation. As for the nervous system, 3 groups are what make it up. There is the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral system includes 12 cranial nerves, and 32 spinal nerves. And lastly, the autonomic system includes the taste buds, the eyes, and the ears. The ears can be divided into three parts, which would include the internal, the middle, and the external section of the ear. For the abiotic factors, water, temperature, air, soil, and sunlight would be included. For biotic factors, their biotic factors would be humans, wild animals, insects, and bacteria. They would be considered a primary consumer in the food chain placement. While mating, it is usual for male and female rats to produce 50 kilohertz of ultrasonic vocalizations. This is something that they do in the anticipation to the introduction of a partner, in the presence of a sexual partner, and or during sexual activity. This is believed to encourage sexual mating actions and behavior. A fun fact is that female rats typically birth about 6 liters a year, which would consist of 12 offspring or more, depending.
Animal background for Lumbricus terrestris. The species kingdom they fall in is Animalia. The phylum is Annelid. The class is Clitolida. The order is Alisphora. The family is Lumbricidae. The genus is Lumbricus, and the species is L. terrestris.
Ecological habitat of an earthworm is soil found near bodies of fresh and salt water. The biotic factors include birds, snakes, moles, squirrels, other insects, plants, bacteria, fungi, etc. Abiotic factors include sunlight, soil, water, rocks, air, temperature, and pH. Earthworms are decomposers and feed upon protozoans, nematodes, rotifers, bacteria, and fungi.
The animal background continued for the earthworms. For mating, the clitellum changes color from pink to a red-orange. They tightly press themselves together with their heads facing opposite of each other. The clitellum becomes encased in an albumin fluid. This fluid is essentially a serum comprised of various different water-soluble proteins and plasma. This casing slides from the clitellum, which is the female reproductive system, and to the prostium, which is the male reproductive system, and this delivers eggs. Their behaviors are that they are most common between dusk and dawn, because some ideas for this would be that they are sensitive to light, or that this lowers their chance of drying out in heat. Certain species of earthworms go into hibernation in the winter, though not all of them do. Some actually go to the surface deliberately when the temperatures drop to die. They also estivate, which means that they fall into a deep hibernation-like sleep when they are close to overheating or drying out.
The digestive system consists of the pharynx, the esophagus, the crop, the intestine, and the gizzard. The food enters through the mouth and is swallowed by the pharynx. It then passes through the esophagus, which has calciferous glands, to get rid of the excess calcium in the earthworm's body. After the food passes through the esophagus, it then moves to the crop and eventually passes into the gizzard. The food then moves into the intestines, where gland cells release fluids to help in the digestive process. Finally, the nutrients from the food are absorbed by blood vessels found in the intestine wall. Excretion is the process of elimination of metabolic waste products from the body. Excretion is effected by segmentally arranged tubules called nephridia. There are 3 types of nephridia: pharyngeal, micronephridia, and meganephridia. The glandular part of the meganephridium extracts the waste from the blood, and finally, the wastes exit out through the nephridopore. The reproductive system earthworms are hermaphrodites, meaning they have male and female reproductive organs. Self-fertilization is avoided as their 2 sex organs mature at different times. The sperm develops earlier than the production of ovaries.
The respiratory system and circulatory system of earthworms. The respiratory system works by intaking oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide through the process of diffusion. Diffusion in earthworms allows oxygen and carbon dioxide to pass through the thin cuticle of the worm's skin and into the cell membrane and to the cells themselves. In order for this process to work, the skin must stay wet in order to breathe because the mucus layer around them has to stay hydrated, because if they dry out, then this process will no longer take place and they'll suffocate. In the circulatory system, they have a closed circulatory system structure. This essentially means that they work with a heart and enclosed blood vessels. They have three main vessels: the aortic arches, ventral blood vessels, and dorsal blood vessels. The aortic arches work together in pairs of 5 and work similar to that of a human heart. These arches are responsible for pumping blood into the vessels themselves. The ventral blood vessel is the primary distributing vessel in an earthworm and brings blood to and from the lower portion of the worm's intestines. And the dorsal blood vessel is the largest and thickest one in the worm's body and circulates blood from the posterior side to the anterior side of its body. Lastly, in the nervous system of the earthworm, it's segmented into 3 sections: the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system. Segmented meaning that it can be separated into the different sections, which are the 3 that were listed. The central nervous system is made up of a nerve ring, which is around the pharynx, and it's also made up of a ventral nerve cord. The peripheral nervous system receives nerves from the central nervous system and distributes them to other parts of the body. And the autonomic nervous system is responsible for sensory and motor processing. And in this system as well, the brain sits atop the pharynx, which connects to the ventral ganglion.
A general comparison and differences between both of them is that for the radish species, they have an internal respiratory system, which means that they have lungs and they use their pharynx in order to breathe in oxygen in order for them to be able to oxygenate their blood. And also they are endothermic, which means that they have their own body temperature that they regulate themselves. And then one similarity that they do have is that they both have a closed circulatory system.
In an earthworm, some of the differences include hibernation. Rats don't need to do that, but some earthworms do. They also use diffusion in order to breathe rather than using a system of lungs and taking in oxygen through a nose or mouth. They are also a hermaphrodite, which means that they carry both male and female reproductive organs. And one similarity between the two of these is that they both have bilateral symmetry. So in a phylogenetic tree, they both have a recent common ancestor, which is the Bilateria. And some reasons that we believe they diverge so much is because of different environmental pressures and needs that where they was lacking